granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello, I'm going to be giving you my take on the press conference that Keir Starmer gave, to the press of course, with reference to the recent disturbances in the Middle East. Now, this is a photograph here that's at my side of the press conference with Keir Starmer talking. And I know that many of you really don't like to look at Keir Starmer. So what I'm going to do is put my dog there instead. And we'll see. A lot of you prefer watching the dog anyway. Last night I set up the camera while he was sleeping, not in this room, but at the top of the stairs leading up to this room. You will notice that we managed to find the time to get some flooring in there, whereas here I'm still walking on chipboard. Anyway, that's beside the point. Let's talk about the Keir Starmer speech. And to relax yourself and soothe your soul, you can watch my dog sleeping and scratching mostly. All right, let's start. Well, to begin with, I have to say, much as I loathe the man, it was quite a good speech. It wasn't strictly honest, but he delivered it with all the plausible appearances of honesty. Right, and as they say, when you can fake honesty, you've got it made, haven't you? I've got some notes stuck up here, so I'm going to be sort of looking sideways. Now, I did notice that robotic nasal whine that he usually speaks in is missing. Maybe he's been taking some voice coaching, but he was definitely delivering in a more statesmanlike way. The only reason I'm not fooled is because, well, I've seen plenty of him already. And I did notice that he avoided answering things directly. Catherine Forster, for instance, who is the political correspondent for GB News, asked him directly, have we let our allies down? And are you going to increase defence spending? And he didn't respond to any of that. He talked around it. So he did it quite skillfully, but he more or less ignored the one about letting the allies down. He talked about the preparations he'd been making, and then he actually forgot about the increase in defence spending until he was going to go on to the next question from someone else, and Catherine Forster chimed in straight away. Oi, what about my question about defence spending? And then he answered it. But you see, you can always say you're putting in more defence spending. The fact is that the pound is losing value, so you could still have the same. And I've been listening to other soldiers on the internet. I mean, not just keyboard warriors, people like Andrew Fox and Richard Kemp. But just a minute, hang on. I have the heater on, the fan heater, so you might have been getting some of that. Anyway, I've switched it off now. In a minute it'll run itself down. Anyway, Kemp and Fox, both of them have said that Britain is woefully undersupplied, and some military analysts said, if we ever had to go to war with Russia, we might last a week at a stretch. And we all know how bad Russia is, can't even manage to overrun Ukraine. All right, so that was Catherine Forster. And then he got a question from Paul McNamara, who is the senior political correspondent for Channel 4 News, who asked, why did you change your mind? Did you want to help and were overruled by Miliband? Now, that was because there had been some anonymous leaks to the Spectator and the Daily Telegraph, who both of them reported an acrimonious meeting on Friday, February the 27th. Starmer says here was inclined to approve allowing US troops the use of British facilities, but he was overruled by Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper, Rachel Reeves and Lord Hermer. And Lord Hermer, of course, he's the Attorney General, and he's always talking about international law. I'd like to know what international law is. Law is pointless without an enforcer. Who's enforcing international law? I mean, that's apart from anything else. And Ed Miliband, for goodness sake, he's the Energy Secretary, which is a non-job. And he's doing a lot of damage, but it really isn't much of a job. Anyway, that's what the rumour was, and that was widely reported in various papers. And it came from, as I said, this anonymous leak. And we don't know how accurate that is, but you'd wonder why there should be any sort of a leak at all if it didn't actually happen. Anyway, he said, no, we're not going to do that. And then he said, that was on the Saturday or the Friday evening or whatever, and then on the Sunday late in the evening, he said, well, yes, all right, we're going to let them use RAF, Fairford and the Chagos Islands. Maybe he will now realise the importance of the Chagos Islands. Well, we can only hope, can't we? Anyway, the delivery he gave was that, it's not that I was overruled. The situation changed. He said, I decided it wasn't good for Britain to allow the Americans to use British facilities because nothing had happened yet. But, he said, when Iran started bombing neighbouring countries like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, well, they were hitting our allies in the Gulf region, and I had to step up. So my question, of course, isn't the US an ally? Of course, as I say, what do I know? I'm just a housewife. Anyway, Starmer said that and then the other thing he said was that on Friday, when he made his denial of facilities, he hadn't received a formal request from the Americans, from the White House, for use of British facilities. And then he said the situation changed on Saturday and we got a formal request. That it sounded, as I said, I've used the word plausible before, I might use it a couple of times here. It sounds plausible enough, except for one thing. When he was denying America the use of our facilities, he didn't talk about no formal request. He didn't mention it once. What he was talking about was international law, that this would be a violation of international law. There is no such thing as international law. What there is are various legal, people who earn their living by pronouncing on the law, giving their opinions about how the law should operate. That is not a law. It's just an opinion on law from various international sources. That's really all international law is. So right at the beginning, this was his words. He was making a choice to avoid involvement in favour of diplomatic solutions. Talk. And he said, right, this is it. Not my responsibility, Gov. It was government lawyers who told me I shouldn't let them in. Now, government lawyers, what does that mean? Lord Hermer. It's Lord Hermer who has been pushing for the Chagos Islands deal, robbery, for instance. Anyway, so that's what he said. It was all to do with government lawyers, of course. Lord Hermer is, so to speak, a government lawyer. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Herman was the one who was doing all of this. Because, well, glove puppet. Anyway, so here, I've written down the timeline. Iran attacked on Saturday, and that included the military base in Bahrain, which has 300 British military personnel on it. And that's when Starmer scrambled the RAF, the Royal Air Force defensive action. He didn't authorise the USA to use British airfields until Sunday evening. And that was because of the clamour, that appears to have been because of the clamour from the Gulf states, who were all under attack by that time. So various sources around Keir Starmer talk about an overnight agreement, which probably means Saturday night, Sunday morning, because he gave his formal approval, the announcement, on Sunday evening. So I don't know why there was this gap of hours, but they said an overnight agreement. So he was probably talking to the White House, in the early hours of Sunday morning. And then the Americans got the use of RAF Fairford and the Chagos Islands. But Trump, of course, wasn't happy with that. He said that 2-day delay put the Americans under a lot of strain, slowed things down. And you see, they have a lot of facilities in Britain. And not being able to use them, they would have had to, well, they did. They switched to Portugal and Greece, I think, but that would have meant a lot more freight when they already had stuff in Britain. So Trump is understandably, from his point of view, understandably aggrieved about that. Okay. And whatever has happened, Starmer has still attached weights to this agreement. It's defensive only. Did you know that? He mentioned it had to be only defensive. Now, of course, you might get away with defining defensive in various sorts of ways, but he still put that in there. And, there's been a lot of talk about him not thinking about British national interests so much as his voter base, political interests. And his voter base, his particular constituency, has a huge Muslim vote. And there's a lot of talk about him pandering to that rather than British general interest. It is in Britain's interest to make sure that the routes stay open from east to west, and Iran has a chokehold on those routes. Trump saw Starmer's shilly-shallying about the facilities as, it said here, a violation of the special relationship during a major conflict. Now, I just want to talk about this special relationship. There is no special relationship. I don't know who thought this up. The British are always quoting it. They want the public to think that they have a special relationship with America. That's a load of bunkum. It's easier to communicate with the Americans because more or less we talk the same language, whereas France and Germany and to a lesser degree Holland, they have just a few more problems communicating with America than Britain does. So that makes things a little smoother, should make things a little smoother and quicker. But there is no special relationship. America does what's good for America. Can you blame them? I don't. What I worry about is whether my Prime Minister is doing what's good for Britain. And I'm not so sure about that. I think he seems to have the agenda of a small but very vocal group of foreign nationals who have no interest in Britain's position in the world, apart from the fact that they're getting money out of it one way or another. But that's another matter. Okay, so it says here Trump saw it as a betrayal of the special relationship. And Starmer defended himself on a sort of a bookkeeper's approach, a lawyer's clerk's approach. As a matter of fact, I saw another interview with an ex-head of Mossad, and he talked to some, I don't remember whether it was talk radio or one of those YouTube channels, I think. Could have been GB News. But anyway, they asked this ex-head of Mossad, what do you think of Starmer's response? And this guy said he was like a butler serving the tea. And oh my God, that got me here, because he was right. And there's no point in saying he's Jeeves, because Jeeves was intelligent. Jeeves was devious and got plans through very easily by manipulating the situation. This guy couldn't manipulate a 1950s radio knob. What Starmer was doing was hiding himself behind the law, talking about laws. You know, lawyers can talk about laws all the time. Anyone who watches The Black Belt Barrister will know that you can take one law and you can interpret it in about 6 different ways, depending on how you argue around it. And this is how Starmer acts. You know, it's not me, it's not my responsibility, it's government lawyers, it's international law, special relationship. I don't know anything. He just hides behind, hang on a minute, I'm afraid the doggy will have to go. Yeah, he hides behind the law. You see that coat of arms there. He hides behind that. He hides behind that oak desk. Sometimes when I look at him there, I think aren't any legs under there. This is just the top half of a robot, and it's just sort of going through the AI motions. Yeah, well, that's my opinion. Anyway, and that's my rundown on his speech to the press and to the nation. Oh, except for to say that he said his priority is to keep British people safe. That was one of the opening gambits of his speech before the press started asking questions. Yeah, sure. If there were more working class white girls in Rotherham and Oldham and London and Oxford and I don't know what, Telford and Bristol and wherever you want, if they were safe, I'd believe him. But they're not, and it's still ongoing, and he won't even hold an inquiry into what has happened, never mind what is happening now. No, his first priority is to keep his MPs and himself in their Labour Party seats, and principally himself. I don't think the safety of Britons is at all his first priority. The safety of his seat, that's another matter. OK, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.